The laughter came first. It rippled across the Galactic Concorde's observation platforms in layered frequencies, clicks, chimes, harmonic pulses, each species expressing amusement in its own way. Tactical holofeeds bloomed above the central dais, displaying the first human projectile streaking through vacuum. It missed. Not by a little. Not by a margin that could be blamed on interference or calibration drift. The kinetic slug passed the Varelian flagship at a distance so vast that the combat probability graph collapsed into a thin, red line of failure. Inaccurate, High Marshal Zirith Velkun declared, his voice amplified for every observer present. His armored crest flared with satisfaction. The expected outcome. More data scrolled in. The projectile continued onward, tumbling harmlessly into the dark. Primitive kinetics, Zirith continued. No adaptive guidance. No predictive intelligence. A relic method wielded by a relic species. Another human shot fired. It missed even wider. This time, the laughter grew louder. Across the Concorde platforms, analysts updated their live evaluations. Humanity's combat rating dropped a full tier before the second projectile finished its trajectory. Some observers began recording commentary pieces, already framing the engagement as a ceremonial failure. Only the humans remained silent. On the bridge of the ES Far Horizon, Commander Elias Ward stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on a muted tactical display. He was tall, spare, his uniform unadorned save for a small command insignia at the collar. No tension showed in his posture. No irritation crossed his face. "Telemetry steady," said Lieutenant Sato from the navigation console. Her voice was calm, professional. "Projectile 1 passing marker grid." "Drift confirmed." Ward nodded once. "Projectile 2 entering thermal boundary," added Chief Engineer Morales. "No anomalies." The gunnery officer hesitated, fingers hovering above the console. "Sir, observers are requesting clarification. They believe our targeting solutions are." "Correct," Ward said. "They are." The officer swallowed and nodded, turning back to his station. On the holofeed, the Varelian fleet shifted formation with ceremonial precision. Their ships were elegant things, curved hulls layered with radiant shielding, energy lattices humming in disciplined harmony. They made no effort to evade. There was no need. High Marshal Zirith watched the human ships with open disdain. "Observe," he said to the Concorde delegates. "They continue firing despite evident failure. This is not bravery. It is ignorance." The Varelian tactical AI highlighted the human vessels. Probability matrices unfolded like flowers, each predicting total human neutralization within minutes once return fire commenced. Zirith allowed himself a moment of indulgence. "Let this serve as instruction. Technological ascension requires more than ambition." On the far horizon, Ward finally spoke again. "Phase 1 continues," he said. "Phase 1? asked Ensign Klein, too new to mask his curiosity completely. Ward glanced at him, not unkindly. "Establishing conditions." Another volley launched. 3 projectiles this time. They diverged immediately, scattering across empty space in directions that made no tactical sense. One skimmed past a dormant asteroid cluster. Another vanished toward a distant gas plume. The third arced high, above the entire battlespace. The Concorde's laughter crested. "Absurd," Zirith said flatly. "They fire as if blind." Yet on a secondary feed, one few bothered to watch, a Varelian logistics cruiser registered a minor fluctuation. Thermal output rose by 0.3%. The systems officer frowned, adjusted a setting, and dismissed the alert as background noise. Back on the far horizon, data streamed in tight columns across Ward's display. Orbital vectors updated. Mass displacement estimates recalculated. Tiny numbers shifted, nudged by forces so subtle they bordered on theoretical. "Fragmentation probability?" Ward asked. "Within acceptable margins," Morales replied. "No visible change yet." Ward allowed himself the smallest exhale. "Good." The Varelians began their demonstration. Energy lances flared from their formation, brilliant arcs of contained annihilation slicing toward the human line. The Concorde's observers leaned forward as one. This, they knew, would be the moment of truth. The human ships moved. Not dramatically. Not with desperate evasions. They adjusted position by fractions of a degree, altered acceleration by measured pulses, slipping between predicted impact points as if they had been written into the firing solutions from the start. The energy beams scorched vacuum where the humans had been moments before. Murmurs replaced laughter. Zaratha's crest twitched. Coincidence? He said sharply. Continue. Another salvo. Another miss. The humans did not return fire immediately. When they did, it was with the same apparent carelessness as before, kinetic rounds flung wide, striking nothing, threatening no hull. Why do they persist? Demanded a Concorde analyst, confusion creeping into his tone. They gain no advantage. Ward watched a new data line appear on his display. Asteroid cluster Theta 9, microfracture detected. He allowed himself a thin smile. Mark, he said. Yes, sir. Proceed. Far from the center of attention, the asteroid the humans had missed minutes earlier finally responded to the insult. Stress lines propagated through ancient rock. A section the size of a city sheared free, altering its spin by an almost immeasurable amount. Almost. On the Varelian logistics cruiser, the thermal fluctuation climbed again. This time, the alert chimed louder. The systems officer opened his mandibles to report, and froze as a second alert followed, then a third. High Marshal Zirith was still speaking when the first officer interrupted him. Marshal, the officer said, confusion threading his voice. We are detecting minor inefficiencies across the fleet. Zirith turned slowly. Define minor. Before the officer could answer, another human projectile streaked through space, sailing past the Varelian flagship by a margin so wide it bordered on mockery. The laughter did not return. On the far horizon, Ward's gaze never left the numbers. Conditions established, Morales said quietly. Ward nodded. Good, he replied. They still think we're missing. And for the first time since the engagement began, the Galactic Concorde began to wonder if the humans were the only ones who understood what was happening. High Marshal Zirith Velkun did not believe in coincidence. Varelian doctrine taught that chaos was merely ignorance wearing a disguise. Every anomaly had a cause. Every failure pointed to a correctable flaw. The universe, properly understood, was orderly, and order always favored those strong enough to impose it. Which was why the quiet alarms unsettled him. Report, Zirith commanded, his voice cutting through the command deck's rising murmur. A junior systems officer stepped forward, mandibles tight. Thermal inefficiencies across auxiliary units, Marshal. Marginal, but synchronized. Synchronized how? Zirith asked. The officer hesitated. Across multiple hull classes. Logistics, escorts, even forward elements. Ziritha's crest flattened slightly. Correlation is not causation. No, Marshal, the officer replied. But the pattern is consistent. On the main holofeed, the human ships drifted in loose formation, unimpressive silhouettes against the void. No return salvos followed the Varelians' last strike. The humans appeared, passive. Zirith turned to the Concorde observers. You see? Even now, they hesitate. Their evasion was luck. Their offense non-existent. As if on cue, the Varelian fleet fired again. This volley was tighter, more disciplined. Energy lances intersected, forming a killing lattice designed to herd targets into inevitable destruction. It was a maneuver refined over centuries. The humans slipped through it. Not with speed. Not with desperation. Their ships adjusted thrust in brief pulses, moving just enough that the lattice failed to converge. Where the beams met, there was only empty space. Silence followed. Ziritha's mandibles clicked once, sharp and irritated. Increase predictive depth. Narrow tolerances. Acknowledged. The tactical officer replied, though his tone carried a faint uncertainty. On the US far horizon, Lieutenant Sato exhaled slowly as the last energy beam faded behind them. "They're adapting," she said. Ward shook his head. "They're compensating." He stepped closer to the central display. The human tactical map looked nothing like the alien one. Enemy ships were present, yes, but dimmed, secondary. Instead, glowing vectors traced orbital shifts, thermal gradients, and energy expenditures. A new alert chimed. "Fuel efficiency drop confirmed," Morales reported. "Fleet-wide, virulent side. Still within safe margins." "Safe margins assume static conditions," Ward said. "Those no longer exist." Another human volley fired. This time, the projectiles didn't even cross the main engagement zone. They vanished into deep space, aimed at nothing discernible. The Concorde erupted, not in laughter now, but confusion. "They're firing into emptiness," a delegate hissed. "Is this some kind of signal?" Ziritha's patience frayed. "Enough," he snapped. "Their display borders on insult." Yet even as he spoke, his command deck filled with overlapping alerts. "Marshal," said the navigation officer. "Micro-adjustments required to maintain formation." Zirith frowned. "We have not altered course." "No, Marshal," the officer replied. "The environment has." Zirith stared at him. "Explain." Before the officer could answer, a low tremor rippled through the flagship, not a physical shock, but a vibration in the energy lattice itself. Shields flared briefly, then stabilized. A logistics captain broke in over comms. "Marshal, requesting clarification. Our correction thrusters are firing more frequently than projected." "How much more?" Zirith demanded. "Approximately 12% above norm." That should not have been possible. Ziritha's gaze snapped back to the holofeed. He replayed the human firing data, isolating the earlier volleys. The first miss skimmed an asteroid cluster. The second passed near a dormant debris field. The third vanished toward a gas plume whose gravitational influence was considered negligible. On the far horizon, Ensign Klein leaned closer to his console. "Sir? Theta 9 just updated." Ward's eyes flicked to the data. A thin line bent, almost imperceptibly. "Fragment confirmed?" Ward asked. "Yes, sir. Spin altered by 0.004 degrees." Ward nodded. "That's enough." Morales frowned. "That shouldn't affect anything for hours." "It would have," Ward said, "if they weren't burning extra power trying to stay perfect." The next virulent salvo came late. Not by much. A fraction of a second. But enough that the firing lattice misaligned, leaving a gap wider than intended. The humans passed through again, untouched. The Concorde observers noticed. "Marshal," one of Ziritha's aides whispered, "their evasion timing matches our correction cycles." Ziritha's crest rose defensively. "Impossible. They lack predictive intelligence." "Then how?" "Enough!" Zirith barked. "Prepare concentrated fire. Overwhelm them." As the order rippled through the fleet, a warning flared crimson on the flagship's display. "Shield harmonic desync, localized." Zirith froze. "Report," he said quietly now. A systems officer swallowed. "Section 7 shield layer fell out of phase. No breach, but coherence dropped to 70%. Cause? Unknown." The officer's voice trembled. "No impact registered." On the far horizon, Ward watched the same moment reflected in his own data. "First failure," Sato murmured. "Expected," Ward replied. "They're burning stability to preserve symmetry." Another human volley launched. These rounds didn't miss wide. They missed high, arching above the entire engagement, threading through a region of space marked only by mathematical abstractions. "Sir," Klein said slowly, "that vector intersects nothing." Ward's expression didn't change. "It intersects everything in 6 minutes." The Concorde feeds began to fill with overlapping chatter. Analysts argued. Observers replayed footage at different scales, trying to find a pattern that made sense. None did. On the Verilian flagship, the shield alert spread. 2 more sections lost coherence. Power rerouted automatically, increasing load elsewhere. "Marshal," the logistics captain said again, this time without restraint. "Fuel containment temperatures are rising." Zirith felt something unfamiliar tighten in his thorax. "How?" he demanded. "We have not been hit." No one answered. Across the battlespace, a distant asteroid finally completed its slow betrayal. The fractured mass drifted just enough to alter a gravity well no one had bothered to monitor. The battlefield began to move. On the far horizon, Ward folded his hands behind his back once more. "Phase 2, he said. The human ships advanced, not aggressively, not triumphantly, but with quiet certainty. Behind them, the first Verilian destroyer lost shield cohesion entirely, its luminous barrier flickering out like a dying star. Still untouched. Still alive. And no longer in control. High Marshal Zirith Velkun had commanded fleets for more than half a century. He had watched stars burn behind failing shields, heard the death cries of admirals who mistook confidence for certainty. Yet nothing in his long service prepared him for the sight unfolding across his command display. His fleet was coming apart. Not exploding. Not shattering under fire. Simply unraveling. "Report," Zirith said, keeping his voice level by force of discipline. The bridge was no longer quiet. Officers spoke over one another, alarms layered into a discordant chorus. "Shield coherence failure spreading, 3 more destroyers affected. Correction thrusters operating beyond tolerance. Fuel containment pressure rising, automatic dampeners engaged." Zirith turned slowly, his crest rigid. "Why?" The question hung unanswered. No impacts registered. No hostile energy signatures. The humans still fired their crude kinetic rounds, but none struck Verilian hulls. There was no enemy blow to answer, no point of contact to retaliate against. Only effects. On the Galactic Concorde's observation platforms, the mood had shifted from confusion to dread. Analysts abandoned their projections, staring instead at raw telemetry that refused to behave. Elegant equations collapsed under accumulating exceptions. "This violates every engagement model," a Concorde physicist whispered. "They're degrading the fleet without engaging it." "Marshal," said a Verilian aide, voice tight. "Navigation reports orbital drift across the formation." "That is impossible," Zirith snapped. "We are maintaining position." The aide hesitated. "We are attempting to." Zirith's mandibles flexed as realization began, slow and unwelcome. He replayed the engagement timeline again, stripping away assumptions. Human projectiles. Misses? Near misses? Shots that passed asteroids, debris, gas plumes. Not random. Not careless. Preparatory. On the U.S. far horizon, Commander Elias Ward stood unmoving as reports flowed in. "Shield failure confirmed on Verilian Destroyer 17, Lieutenant Sato said. "No breach, but total collapse imminent." "Power redistribution?" Ward asked. "Exceeding safe limits," Morales replied. "They're chasing equilibrium that doesn't exist anymore." Ward nodded once. "Open a channel." Sato glanced up, surprised. "To whom, sir?" "To anyone still listening." The channel opened. Across the battle space, Ward's calm voice carried without amplification, unadorned by ceremony. "This engagement is concluded," he said. Zirith whirled toward the comm station. "Who authorized?" The voice continued unhurried. "You have not been defeated," Ward said. "You have been rendered unable to continue." Zirith stepped forward, his image flooding the channel. "Human commander," he hissed. "You claim victory without striking a blow." Ward met his gaze through the void. "We struck. You just weren't watching the right places." Behind Zirith, another alert flared. "Fuel containment breach, PRE ignition state." "Explain," Zirith demanded, the word tearing free. Ward's expression remained composed. Your fleet is optimized for perfection. Symmetry. Constant correction. Every deviation costs you energy. We introduce deviations. You miss, Zirith said weakly. Ward shook his head. We aimed. A Concord delegate cut into the channel, unable to contain herself. Commander Ward, are you saying this was environmental warfare? Not warfare, Ward replied. Engineering. As he spoke, a Varelian cruiser drifted out of formation, thrusters firing in a futile attempt to realign. Its fuel temperature spiked again, systems fighting contradictory inputs. You rely on stable orbits, Ward continued. Predictable gravity wells. Clean energy exchange. We altered those assumptions. Incrementally. Patiently. Zirith felt the weight of the truth settle into his thorax. You turned space itself against us, he said. No, Ward replied. We let it do what it always does. You just built your fleet as if it wouldn't. Another ship lost power, drifting silent and intact. The Concord platforms erupted into frantic analysis. Models recalculated. New doctrines shattered before they could form. Marshal, an officer whispered, fear finally naked in his tone. We cannot maintain shields and propulsion simultaneously. Zirith closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. How long? He asked quietly. Until catastrophic failure? The officer swallowed. Minutes. Perhaps less. Zirith straightened and faced the human commander once more. You could have destroyed us. Yes, Ward agreed. We chose not to. Why? Ward paused, just long enough to make the moment deliberate. Because destruction teaches nothing. Consequence does. Silence followed. Across the fleet, systems failed gracefully, one by one. No explosions. No glory. Just power draining away as ships slipped into helpless drift. Zirith felt something he had not felt since his first campaign, fear untempered by anger. You were never aiming at us, he said, the realization complete. Ward nodded. We were aiming at what kept you fighting. The High Marshal lowered his crest. I order a ceasefire, Zirith said, voice carrying across every channel. All Varelian vessels, power down weapons. The order echoed into a fleet that could no longer argue. On the Concord platforms, no one spoke. They watched the battlefield settle into stillness, human ships intact and mobile, alien warships silent and drifting like monuments to misplaced certainty. Ward waited until confirmation scrolled across his display. Sato, he said. Plot withdrawal course. Yes, sir. As the human fleet turned away, the Concord delegate found her voice again. Commander Ward, she called. How should we classify humanity after this engagement? Ward considered the question as stars shifted outside the viewport. That's up to you, he said at last. Just don't mistake restraint for limitation. The channel closed. On the Varelian flagship, Zirith watched the human ships depart, untouched, unhurried. Around him, his fleet hung powerless, defeated without a single direct hit. For the first time in his long career, High Marshal Zirith understood the true terror of humanity. They did not fight to win battles. They fought to make them unnecessary. And the galaxy would never look at empty space the same way again.